When did American Eagle stop being a brand people talked about? And how did it happen so quietly? If you were a teenager in the 2000s, you probably owned their jeans. The logo hoodies, the all-American image, it was everywhere. Walk into any mall and American Eagle wasn't just part of the conversation. It was the conversation. And for a while, that dominance felt untouchable. But even at its peak, the cracks were already there. Overexposure, constant discounting, and a brand identity that started to blur as the market around it moved faster. Because today, the stores are still there, and the business is still running. But the relevance isn't. Growth has slowed, competitors have taken over the conversation, and the brand that once defined a generation now struggles to define itself. So what actually happened? How does a brand go from being everywhere to barely being noticed at all? American Eagle's story didn't start with a vision, actually. It started with a problem. Back in 1977, brothers Jerry and Mark Silverman launched the brand as an outdoor and leisure label. Think hiking boots, rain jackets, the kind of gear meant to compete with LL Bean. But the thing is, it wasn't really working. The market was just too niche, the positioning too narrow, and by the early 1980s, the brand was struggling. So, the Silvermans sold a 50% stake to the Schottenstein family, a retail dynasty that had a very different idea of where this brand could go. You see, the Schottensteins didn't see an outdoor brand. They saw a blank canvas sitting right in the middle of the fastest-growing retail environment in America, the mall. So in 1991, they acquired the rest of the company and made the call that would define the next 2 decades. They stripped out the outdoor identity entirely and repositioned American Eagle around that casual, all-American style: denim, graphic tees, flannel. It was affordable, but not cheap. Aspirational, but not out of reach. It was a formula built for one specific customer, the mainstream American teenager who just wanted to look good. And the timing? It was almost perfect. Mall culture in the 1990s wasn't just about retail. It was the social infrastructure of an entire generation. And American Eagle placed itself right at the center of it all. The company went public in 1994, used that capital to expand fast. And by the late 90s, the brand had grown from a regional name into a national fixture. And then came the move that turned it into a cultural institution. In 1999, American Eagle became the official outfitter of Dawson's Creek, at the time, the most watched teen drama on television. Overnight, the brand wasn't just in malls anymore. It was on screen, on the backs of characters that teenagers across the country were watching every week, dressing like and aspiring to be. Now that kind of placement can't be manufactured. It has to feel natural, and this did. American Eagle became synonymous with a very specific idea of American youth: clean-cut, confident, a little bit romantic. And for a few years, that idea was simply everywhere. But being everywhere, as it turns out, is not the same as being essential. And the difference between those two things would matter more than anyone at the company seemed to realize. The problem with owning the mainstream is that, eventually, the mainstream moves on. By the mid-2000s, American Eagle was still a giant. It was profitable, it was expanding, but that cultural energy that had carried it through the late 90s, it was starting to thin out. The logo that once felt like a badge of belonging had become so common it just stopped meaning anything. And the world around it was changing in ways the brand just wasn't built to respond to. You see, fast fashion arrived, and it arrived fast. Brands like H&M, Zara, and Forever 21 introduced a completely different model. They were offering runway-inspired looks at throwaway prices, with new collections hitting stores every few weeks. It was a speed that made traditional mall brands look slow, almost predictable. Suddenly, teenagers who had grown up on American Eagle had options that felt more exciting, more current, and a whole lot cheaper. The brand that had once defined the mainstream was now competing for its own audience. And at the exact same time, the mall itself was dying. The 2008 financial crisis just accelerated a shift that had been building for years. Foot traffic dropped, anchor stores closed, That whole social ritual of spending a Saturday at the mall was being replaced by something faster, more personal, and entirely online. American Eagle's entire business model, you have to remember, was built around a physical experience that was quietly becoming irrelevant. So what was the response? Well, it was predictable. And it was damaging. The brand leaned into promotions. Constant sales, deep discounts, those buy one, get one signs plastered across every storefront. Sure, it drove some short-term traffic, but it hollowed out the brand's value in the process. Because when everything is always on sale, the customer stops believing in the full price. And eventually, they stop believing in the brand itself. And by 2014, the numbers told the full story. A 10% drop in comparable sales in a single quarter. The CEO was fired, and the company announced it would close up to 150 stores. American Eagle, the brand that had once felt so untouchable, was now in a full-blown crisis. And the whole industry was watching, wondering if it could find its way back, or if it would just become another casualty of the retail apocalypse it had spent years trying to ignore. So what saved American Eagle? It wasn't a new strategy. It wasn't a new CEO or a rebrand or some dramatic pivot. Actually, what saved it was a sub-brand that had been sitting quietly in the background since 2006. And it all came down to a single decision that would change the conversation entirely. That sub-brand was Aerie. It was launched as American Eagle's answer to Victoria's Secret, a lingerie and loungewear line for young women. And for its first few years, it was fine, functional, nothing really remarkable. But in 2014, right as the parent brand was collapsing, Aerie made a move that would turn it into one of the most talked about retail stories of the decade. They stopped airbrushing their models, and that was it. That was the move. In a market just saturated with hyper-edited, unattainable images, Aerie chose to show real bodies. Different sizes, different shapes, stretch marks, scars, tattoos. The hashtag Aerie Real campaign wasn't built on a celebrity or a trend. It was built on a simple, direct message. You don't need to be fixed. And the timing? It was extraordinary. Victoria's Secret was still operating on this model of fantasy and exclusion that was feeling more and more out of step with what young women actually wanted. Aerie walked straight into that gap. The campaign didn't just drive sales, it built a community. Women who felt completely unseen by the industry's standard of beauty found something in Aerie that felt genuinely different. And they responded. Sales grew quarter after quarter, then year after year. Aerie posted 25 consecutive quarters of double-digit sales growth before the pandemic finally interrupted the streak. By 2021, the brand crossed $1.3 billion in annual revenue, a number that would have been unthinkable just a decade earlier. The sub-brand had become the engine of the entire company, literally carrying American Eagle Outfitters Incorporated through a period when the flagship brand couldn't carry itself. It was a remarkable story, but it also created a tension that the company has never really resolved. You see, Aerie had a voice, a purpose, and a loyal audience. The main American Eagle brand, it had none of those things. And the bigger Aerie grew, the more obvious that gap became. By 2025, the pressure to do something with the American Eagle brand had been building for years. Aerie was thriving, but the flagship was still just searching for a reason to exist. So the company made a bet, a big, loud, impossible-to-ignore bet on Sydney Sweeney. The campaign launched in July 2025 with a tagline that was supposed to be clever. Sydney Sweeney has great genes. A play on words, right? Genes, as in denim. Genes, as in genetics. You had Sweeney, blonde, blue-eyed, one of Hollywood's most visible stars, talking about how her genes determined her eye color, her hair, her look. The brand called it cheeky, but a lot of people called it something else. The backlash was immediate, and it was sharp. Critics accused the campaign of leaning into eugenics, that discredited idea that certain genetic traits are superior, and of using the language of white beauty standards to sell denim. In a cultural moment already so charged with conversations about representation, the campaign felt to many like a deliberate provocation. In the weeks that followed, foot traffic at American Eagle stores actually dropped. And then Donald Trump posted about it. He called it the hottest ad out there, praised Sweeney, and claimed the jeans were flying off the shelves. The stock surged 23% in a single day. By the end of the year, American Eagle's share price rose an incredible 74%. For a moment, it looked like the controversy had somehow become the strategy, that the brand had stumbled into a cultural flashpoint that was generating more attention than any planned campaign could have ever bought. But the business reality? It caught up, and it caught up quickly. When the first quarter results came in, they were a disaster. Revenue fell 5%. Merchandising had missed badly. The wrong product, the wrong quantities, the wrong timing. The company was sitting on mountains of unsold spring and summer inventory, and the only way out was to write it all off. $75 million. Just gone. Management withdrew its full-year guidance entirely, which in the world of retail is about as close to waving a white flag as a public company can get. The stock fell 17% in a single session. The Sweeney campaign had generated billions of impressions and almost no lasting commercial momentum. The buzz was real, but the business impact wasn't. American Eagle today is a company that knows how to survive, but it hasn't quite figured out how to lead. Aerie continues to grow. It keeps building on that foundation of authenticity it established a decade ago, and it continues to be the main reason American Eagle Outfitters Incorporated is still a viable business. The brand has a clear identity, a loyal customer base, and a story it can keep telling. That part of the business, it works. The flagship brand, though, is a different story. The company has tried celebrity partnerships, Sweeney, Travis Kelce, various country artists, and each one generates a moment of attention before it just fades. The Q4 results for 2025 were actually strong, with comparable sales up 8% and record holiday revenue. But analysts were quick to point out that the Aerie brand drove the majority of that growth. American Eagle itself, it posted modest gains. The pattern is consistent. Aerie leads, American Eagle follows. The deeper issue here isn't really about product or marketing. It's about identity. American Eagle was built for a world that just doesn't exist anymore. The world of the American Mall, that Saturday afternoon social ritual. The idea that a logo on a hoodie said something important about who you were. That world is gone, and the brand hasn't found a new story to replace it. Now there's a version of this where American Eagle finds its footing again. The scale is there. The distribution is there. The denim heritage is real. The brand crossed $1 billion in jean sales back in 2018 and has held that position. And the financial cushion that Aerie provides? It buys time that most struggling brands never get. But time only matters if you use it to answer the right question. And the right question isn't, who should we partner with next? It's, what do we actually stand for? Aerie answered that question back in 2014 and built an empire on it. American Eagle is still looking for its answer. So here's the question I'll leave you with. When a brand loses the cultural moment that made it relevant, can it actually build a new one? Or does it just keep chasing the echo of the old one? Because right now, that's exactly what American Eagle looks like. A brand that remembers being important but hasn't decided what it wants to be next. Curious to hear what you think. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.